Hello, my name is Nicholas Repholz, and in conjunction with Carol Riddle, we present to you Bruner's constructivist theory. Who was Jerome Bruner? Jerome Bruner was an educational philosopher at Harvard University. He was an avid reader, and he was an author of the book, The Study of Education, and an influencer of education around the world for the cause of constructivism. Well, what is constructivism? Constructivism includes many different ideas. For instance, the four important facets of all learning processes: that there is predisposition, structured knowledge, modes of representation, and effective sequencing. And how learners, through the modes of representation, went from the inactive stage to the iconic stage to the symbolic stage, where they are using language. How learners are ready to learn very complex ideas even at young ages. And he denied the idea of readiness, that a student had to be at a certain level in order to learn about a certain topic. He expounded on the fact that social experiences were extremely important in education. But his three most impactful things that he wrote about in the constructivist theory were discovery learning, scaffolding, and the spiral curriculum. Discovery learning is a student-centered and inquiry-based strategy of solving problems, taking independence, and developing responsibility. It's not unassisted, but instead it is teacher-structured, and it has a lot of impacts on science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. Carol Riddle helped me give examples of this in her own classroom. For instance, instead of lecturing about buoyancy, students discovered it themselves by building a very buoyant boat. Or instead of lecturing about how salts react in the presence of heat, they did it themselves to discover what salts do on their own. Another example of something that is very influential within constructivism is scaffolding, or building upon previously learned information, moving from the simple to the complex. And there are two different examples of this in Carol Riddle's classroom, which I thought were pretty amazing. She was lecturing on the conductivity of metals and how copper wire can transfer electricity, and then moved on to some complex things, like actually doing some computer engineering yourself, or in her classroom, building a circuit, an application of what the students had already learned. That is a pretty incredible example of scaffolding. And the last part of constructivism that was very impactful is the spiral curriculum, where students have to revisit things they have already learned. And it is increasingly difficult each time. And students have to learn new things through acquisition, bring in old things they know through transformation, and evaluate how to apply that to things like the scientific method. Has application in adult learning. For instance, we revisit the things we've learned in undergraduate times in order to become experts with our graduate degrees. And here's an example of the spiral curriculum in action. The student had already learned about crickets and revisited them by taking care of them each and every day, visiting the same things he's learned over and over again. Now, there are advantages and disadvantages to these constructivism tenets. For instance, the advantages of motivation, enjoyment, responsibility, understanding, and imagination. But skeptics say that they would have to restructure their whole classrooms. It's a waste of time. It requires an enormous amount of preparation, and there's an inherent lack of structure. My classroom would be chaos, they say. Which is why you have to weigh the advantages and disadvantages and decide what amount of constructivism is right for your classroom. And lastly, the conclusions. Bruner's constructivist theory, number one, forced society to reassess the merits of traditional classrooms. Number two, influenced many teachers' educational philosophies. And number three, brought into question the best practices for pedagogy. Thank you very much for attending, and I hope you learned a lot about Jerome Bruner's constructivist theory.